today. We're so excited you're with us. We're talking about his book, The Crucibles That Shape Us, Navigating the Defining Challenges of Leadership, University Press. I encourage you to pick it up. And Dr. Beebe is a CEO in one sense, in terms of, he studied under Peter Drucker, his MBA, several advanced degrees, but he also pastored. He's got a pastor's heart, and he's a strong leader, and he's a very smart person as well. So he's got a great combination of gifts, but he's also, for me, he's got all that, but he returns my emails. So he's the feeder on the ground, which is, I love that about you too. And as I mentioned last time, he was a catcher, he was an athlete, and so we share that in common. And he's been at Westmont College here in Santa Barbara, California, for 18 years. I want to talk about the crucible of social conflict. Yeah. And you went through the racial tensions, the George Floyd situation that happened, just the diversity, the beauty of diversity.
Right.
God created diversity. It's an amazing thing. And then we end up with these smaller ecosystems or pockets where there isn't diversity. And then we have to figure out, well, what does that mean? And how do we navigate that? And you've worked a lot on this. Can you share a little bit about that? And also, I want to talk about social trust, because you reference in here that the riots that had happened in part were due to a loss of social trust. Yeah. I think we've experienced quite a bit of that recently. Can you comment on that?
Well, gosh, it's a great observation, great question. For me, so many things, I have to know or experience them personally, understand them personally, in order for me to be able to understand them socially. And so what was happening at Westmont was during the spring of 2020, there were, even as it was before the pandemic had started, but it quickly coincided with the pandemic. And then you'll remember the George Floyd murder on Memorial Day of 2020, which really just kind of distilled all of this, just kind of this cauldron, this brewing cauldron of animosity that was just beneath the surface. And who knows for sure all of the reasons? I mean, we speculate. There's a lot of speculation. A lot of magazines and newspapers have been written talking about what do we think were the causes, and some of them were identified. But here's what really hit me. I began to hear stories from Westmont alums that had had difficult experiences at the college. And that was no longer something in the newspaper or in a trade journal. That was us. And in some cases, I actually knew the people, and in a few of the cases, I knew them super well and didn't even know it had gone on. Mm. And so, it was really a journey of both understanding and then figuring out how do we respond differently, because former students, particularly students of color, had really difficult experiences tied to our college, and I felt very responsible for that, and still do feel very responsible for that. It caused us to do some interventions that I'm really pleased with, that including we started a program where we went back and looked at students of color who had not finished, and any of the students of color who were within a year of finishing, we actually invited them to come back and to finish their education, and we would actually provide the tuition for them to get to the end.
Wow.
Now, not a lot of them took us up on it, but some did, and I'm just really pleased that we made that effort. But it remains one of those teachable moments where you recognize that what's happening culturally is also happening within your own college. And so I think it began to make us more sensitive to how we were very mindful of the need to diversify the curriculum without watering it down. But we hadn't made enough headway. Well, it gave us the momentum to really tie into that. We now have a general education requirement that includes conversations around justice, reconciliation, and diversity. But we did it consistent with us. We didn't do it just bending the knee to the cultural conversation. We're a biblical and theologically grounded college. it's got to be done in biblical and theological frameworks. And we do believe this is God's will for the world. So it isn't just a passing fad. And how do we then not just embed it, but actually teach it? And so it's been a joint effort. I mean, it's required people in every area of the college to be involved, including the board of trustees, who's had to be actively involved. We've named a chief diversity officer, Dr. Carmel Saad. She's fantastic. We're doing a lot of work in terms of how do we understand how people develop bias and prejudice, and then how do we come to understand it? And we talk about microaggressions. Well, Dr. Saad is actually taking us through microaffirmations that set a different context. And so just like you can learn how to avoid saying things that indirectly put people on edge, you can also be trained in how to say subtle things that make people feel welcome and affirmed. And you can be more mindful of just subtle ways that communication actually impacts the cultural environment. And so she's amazing, and we're blessed to have her. And then we have several faculty that are actually retooling classes in order to teach, offer general ed classes that get at justice, reconciliation, and diversity. And so that was part of our learning. Now, I love John Lewis. The reason I love John Lewis is he was a protege of Martin Luther King Jr., who I greatly admire. And I look at King and I say, you know, he's often, for me, I was born and raised in the Quaker tradition, and so his nonviolent civil disobedience fit with our framework of faith, that you don't resort to violence to solve the problem of violence. You resort to the love of God. But it takes discipline, and it takes enormous work and courage and faith in the face of a lot of animosity and hostility. King had all of that. And so people, though, have speculated since he was assassinated when he was 39, would he have changed over time? And to me, John Lewis at age 80, not having deviated from the message at all, is the best example of what King would have been had he lived to a natural life, or a natural end of his life. And I think he would have continued to follow the gospel teaching of love conquering hate. And I think that that has to be at our core what we're motivated by as a Christian college, as a Christian people. And then I think beyond just our own faith identity, I think King is not just a great person on race relations. I think he's a great person on human relations. And I think he has the genius of what actually makes communities work, not just racial communities, what makes all communities work. And there is a sense in which he has a generosity of spirit. He has a generosity of spirit that is just phenomenal. And Dean, I cannot imagine, like I was reading so many, when I was writing chapter 4 and chapter 5, I was reading so many books that told stories that I had not, if I knew them, I didn't remember them. And there literally were people who were trying to kill him, trying to blow him up, trying to do harm to his family. I can't imagine doing my job as president of Westmont with that kind of threat. And here he is, he's leading a national movement, really is the figurehead, not just nationally, but globally. And all the while, he's wondering, is he even going to be alive next week? And so there's a tremendous model there in terms of not just how do you carry redemptive values into the marketplace, but how do you have the inner strength given to you by God to actually stand in the face of all this animosity? And so it really is amazing. So those are that's some of the background thought that went into both chapter 4 and chapter 5.
Bob Goff always says, "What would we do if we weren't afraid?" And I think about Martin Luther King. I think any normal person would be in the fetal position, or hiding, or trying to hire security, or not even, if you were trying to preserve your life. But it's almost like he wasn't trying to preserve his life.
That's right. No, he that's what's so remarkable about it is, here these bombs didn't blow up his house when he was still in Alabama. It was early in the movement. It would have been so easy to go, hey, this is too much trouble. And instead he leans into it and just is
Jackie Robinson.
Jackie Robinson, the same way, these epic figures that are really transformational.
How do you be a college president in the culture when you're staying true to the biblical values. We know who we are. That
Yeah.
can't change. Your first obedience, I know, is to the Lord.
Absolutely.
But then we have this culture where the wind's shifting and sometimes blowing real hard
Yeah.
in one direction that may not be in line with who God is and who we are as his followers. How do you navigate that as a college president? Because I've seen you do it in an amazing way. I would just affirm you. I don't know many college presidents. I know Barry Corey's dealing with his own stuff, but in Azusa, I think has been a little bit of a tough deal over the last few years. How do you do that?
Well, certainly I don't do it perfectly, and I'm aware many people are willing to point that out.
I'm not one of them.
But where I do feel at home and at peace in my own spirit is, again, staying present, staying emotionally present, and paying attention. What is the criticism that's coming in? What part of it is unfounded? What part of it is true? And or what are blind spots? And if you can preserve a sense of humility about, and this I learned it from my faith, but I also learned it from Daniel Kahneman, the great social psychologist in Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talks about all of us have a tendency to believe what we see is all there is. Mm-hmm. He said if we would just show up with a little humility and go, what am I not seeing? And I actually talk about that in chapter 1, where I was so struck when we had Dr. Kahneman here and in preparing for his visit. It's just like I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, what am I not seeing when I sit in a situation? And that's kind of the way I take input. Now, if you come at me and you're being belligerent or really disrespectful, that doesn't get through, because that's not a constructive way for human engagement. But if you come to me and say, look, I want to talk to you, there's some things that really concern me, and they include you. And I had one of these conversations just yesterday where a person just felt like I wasn't seeing things that are going on. Well, I deeply appreciated it. And it's not that I agree with all the input, but it was a conversation where I could say, well, this is what you didn't know was behind that. Mm-hmm. But boy, on this, I didn't see it that way, and I see what you're saying, and I recognize the value and the accuracy of what you're saying. And so I think if you can preserve kind of the Kahneman type humility of I see a lot, but I don't see everything. What is going on here that I haven't seen?
So what I heard there was humility, discernment, listening, and so you don't, and the fact that we have to do it in a civil way, or it just drowns out the point.
It gets lost in the medium.
Right, is the message.
Is the message. And if you're angry, I'll notice your anger, and I'll have trouble hearing your message.
So you don't, because I don't want to be the guy that's like the big bad culture. I don't see it that way, but I also, I don't. I'm not an early adopter.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like I don't. This is the new thing we have to do. And I always want to say, says who?
Yeah. No, well, and I think that's actually a good instinct, because I think there are places for early adopters, but institutions always outlive individuals. And so you've got to be mindful of the enduring testimony of institutions, not just the transient role of institutions. And I think that is sometimes forgotten, particularly by leaders responsible for preserving and advancing institutions. And there are a number of things where we look at things, we will always, our goal is to treat every person with integrity, care, and respect. Mm-hmm. And we get it right a lot of the time, but we don't get it right all the time. And so we have to be able to say, okay, how can we approach this better, differently, more effectively, and what does that need to look like? Not necessarily giving in to cultural winds, but saying we've still got to be in the conversation and not just indifferent to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're probably walking very closely with your board through all these kinds of things.
Totally. I mean, if you in the acknowledgments, I actually thank the board.
I saw my name. I saw that. Mike Allen.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love Mike Allen, and I have a long journey with Mike Allen. What an amazing man he is.
Well, and all of them really are just fascinating personalities.
I had a lunch with Mary Barber the other day.
Oh, she's a deer. She is amazing.
You've got some really amazing.
We have some great board members.
Yeah, I have to put my glasses on again. In terms of the crucible of human suffering.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm spending a lot of time there because that's one of the things I think about a lot. But you talk about embracing life as a quest rather than seeing hardships as unnecessary intrusions or complete disruptions. One of the things I think we need to do better is prepare young people for a life as it really is going to be.
Yeah.
And I know I don't want to have you repeat stuff, but I am interested in this because I think this is, I'd never thought of it that way in terms of embracing life as a quest and not seeing the hardships as unnecessary intrusions or disruptions, but seeing them as part of the quest.
Yeah.
And then I get up and I'm resilient, but it's part of the process, and God knows the whole story.
Right.
But do you want to say anything more about that?
Well, gosh, I love you coming to that because I often think about we tend to see experiences of evil and suffering as opposed to the purposes of God.
Right.
And instead of seeing them as, how do we see them as divine passageways of where we actually recognize that this is the evil, the rain will fall on the just and the unjust. Right. The suffering will come to the honorable and the dishonorable equally. And so how does the honorable, just person actually understand the suffering enough to persevere through it? Because God has said this will be a part of our life. Right. How then do we make sense of it? And for me, I had to make sense of the problem of evil and suffering, believing in an all-powerful, all-loving God. It took me 5 years, but once I had really come to a full wealth of conviction, it got me to the other side where I have suffered since then. But the suffering has had a different tone. It hasn't been a threat to my belief in God or my spiritual life. It's been an emotional toll and a sense of just loss. But it's also allowed me to be present with people who are suffering and not be destabilized by it. And I think one of my favorite passages of Scripture is Romans 12:15. Weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice. And I think it's a portrayal of empathetic presence, of how do we actually stay present with people who are suffering and not just saying, oh, what a distraction, I don't want to get drawn into their drama. God wants us drawn into the drama of one another. That's part of community, and that's literally where people heal.
So good. Stretcher bearers.
Yeah. Oh, that was that was like in the 90s. That came out, that book. No,
he was in my high school.
Okay, because he was Southern California based.
Yeah, he's Orange County.
Okay,
we were there.
Yeah.
And that's so good. And one of the things you wrote here is you said we must see where our egocentrism gets appropriately checked as we face the reality of suffering. The ego can get pretty well kicked out of you in this life, I've found.
Well, it's interesting. That's actually an insight I learned from Iris Murdoch. I wrote my master's thesis at Princeton Seminary under Diogenes Allen, and he introduced me to Simone Weil, and then introduced me to Iris Murdoch, the great British novelist who was deeply influenced by Simone Weil. And Murdoch has this line, that essentially the biggest problems in life are a result of our dull, fat, relentless ego. And she said, the goal of the spiritual life is to overcome your dull, fat, relentless ego. And she basically says that most of us, if we don't enter a spiritual journey, will never get beyond ourselves. Yeah. And if we don't get beyond ourselves, we actually won't see reality as it actually is. We'll only see an egocentric view of reality, which always has us as the center of the universe.
Isn't that powerful?
Well, it was, and she was a very highly trained philosopher, but felt that her ideas needed to get into common parlance, and so she went into writing novels and wrote, like 30 novels, and in which she basically embedded these ideas in different personalities.
It's an amazing. As the great philosopher once wrote, The ego is not your amigo. That's going to be
That's
my
good.
book. Maybe that's
good.
the title of my book.
That's
Maybe
a great title.
The ego is not your amigo. You talk about in the crucible of human treachery.
Yeah.
And you went through some of personal examples of situations that you deal with where some, and you talk about the different kinds of people that can come in opposition to you.
Yeah.
And then having God bring issues to light, letting God bring issues to light, and seeing His redemptive purposes at work, seeing Him deal with false accusations. That person who you went to lunch with or whatever, I can't remember the story, but when he said, walk in righteousness and let God bring the issues to light. That's got to be really bathed in trust.
Well, great point. The way the person actually said it, I softened it for the book because they actually said, "Let God settle the score," and I thought that comes off too strong. But that's actually more accurate to Scripture, where really it's like you've got to leave this in the hands of God, or it'll destroy you. But trust God to settle the score. And but this person was not vindictive, and it comes off as sounding like we're being vindictive. He was just saying, this is the way the spiritual universe works. Mm-hmm. And you have got to get out of the way, and you've got to trust God to handle it, and God will use other people to handle it. And that proved true. And so when you go through these experiences and you have people that are wiser than you, that are willing to speak into your life, and they encourage you to go a path that you know you would not have gotten to naturally. I mean, that is one of the ways in which I experience the presence of the Holy Spirit. Yeah. I never would have thought of that. Yeah. And that is so right, and you can sense in the moment the rightness of it. And so it really got me to a place where I could release it to God and settle back in and begin to do my work. And I actually just heard from the guy. I haven't seen him in years. Just heard from him yesterday.
Really?
Yeah. He sent me a text, said, "Hey, I was just thinking about you. Wondered how you're doing." It's wonderful to hear from him.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I'm a fighter by nature. I don't know if it's the Irish or that they are. And man, you pour a little vodka on that, and it wasn't always good. But I'm a fighter by nature, and then so this idea of God is your protector, God is your defender, your rear guard.
Yeah.
And I'm used to fighting my own battles. That's my human nature. Yeah. And so to really, that's a step of trust for guys like me, I think.
Well,
to do that.
I think that's true, and also, you have to then get underneath what makes you a fighter. Is it partly that you didn't feel the people in charge showed up to protect you? What gave you? And there's usually some of that, where as you excavate kind of the motive base of your own life, you begin to recognize when you develop dispositions, and it was usually because something was lacking in terms of why you overcompensated certain ways, and which is true for me too. And so, I look at human treachery, and part of what I learned is where people are tempted. And my dad, it was so fun to talk to him because he was not a suspicious person, but he was a discerning person. And so like he would tell me stories of why he decided not to do certain things. And he said, "I can't prove this to you. I just don't think the person is honorable." And that's interesting. What does he mean by the person's not honorable? Well, I will now meet people and I'll go, "This is what he meant."
Right.
And you
got
see,
it.
yeah,
Right.
30 years after the fact, but his voice,
isn't that amazing?
It really is. And so I think we all have people like that in our life that are speaking into our life.
Yeah.
If we'll listen and if we'll pay attention to see, okay, where is that showing up in my own life? And
to do it without suspicion.
He
discernment without suspicion.
And it was, he really trusted people, but he only trusted them to a point where if you proved yourself not worthy, he wouldn't ostracize you. He would say, "That person lives with situational integrity. They mean well in the moment." And so
it seemed like the right thing to do at the time.
Yeah. And then he would give an example of it. And so but I'm just thankful for his voice in my life even today. And And, I just pray that for my own children. I pray that for the people I love, that they will have people around them that will speak into their life and help them see what they're facing, so that they can be more effective in how they respond to what life brings them.
So good. And we're going to take one more quick break and then just a couple more minutes if you have a little bit more time.
I love it.
So grateful you're joining us. We're talking with Dr. Gayle Beebe, president of Westmont College. We're talking about his new book, The Crucibles That Shape Us. And you can find it at InterVarsity Press, but you can find it probably most anywhere. So we'll be back with a little bit more right after this.